everybody, and welcome to Chef's Baking Blog. Today I'm going to make some Cornish pasties. So Cornish pasties are a pastry, and quite a tough pastry, which encases some beef, potato, swede, also known as rutabaga, and onion, and with some salt and pepper. And these pasties originated really many years ago. They were taken by the miners, probably the tin miners in Cornwall, to work as their lunch, and they usually have quite a thick rim, which I believe was used for them because they'd be dirty in the mine to hold in their hand as they're eating their pasty. But anyway, they're a very particular thing, and if you watch any videos online, Cornish people will always tell you under no circumstances should carrot be put into the pasty, so I'm not putting carrot in, but you can vary the ingredients if you want to. They just won't be Cornish pasties, but they'll still be very nice pasties. So what we have to do is to make the pastry and then rest it, and then simply combine the various elements of the filling in the pastry, roll it up, and put it in the oven to bake. So I'll go on to the ingredients, and for the pastry I have 500 grams, which is 3 1/3 cups of bread flour, based on scooping packed flour into a 250 milliliter cup. I have 150 grams, 10 tablespoons plus 2 teaspoons of unsalted butter, which is cubed and cold, and I have 100 grams, 7 tablespoons of lard, which is also cubed and cold, but it's softer than the butter because lard is. If you don't have lard, you can use shortening instead if you want to. That will work fine. You could use all butter, but traditionally there would be lard in the pastry. Then I have 6 grams, 1 teaspoon of salt. I have 100 millilitres of ice cold water, and I may not need all of it. And I have 1 egg, or 1 medium egg, but 1 egg which I'm going to beat, and we'll use that as an egg wash. So that's for the pastry. Now I haven't prepared the filling ingredients yet. I'll tell you what they are. I'm going to use 400 grams of beef, which is going to be cut into smaller pieces than this, into sort of maybe 1 centimetre slivers basically. And I'm using chuck beef. You could use skirt, you could use any beef you wanted to, as long as it's one of those flavoursome ones. I have, I'm going to use 400 grams of potato, and again I'll cut that, but I'll show you what they look like once I've done that later on. I'm going to use 200 grams of swede or rutabaga. This is the swede basically, very tasty. I have half a teaspoon, 3 grams of salt, and I'm going to use some pepper as well, a good healthy dose of pepper. And that's all the ingredients for the filling. But the first thing we need to do is to go on and make our pastry. And to make the pastry, you can do it by hand and rub the butter and the lard into the flour, rubbing it between your fingers, but I'm going to do it in the processor bowl of my immersion blender, and I'm going to put maybe about half of the flour in to start with, and then I'm going to tip in the butter and the lard, and then put the rest of the flour over the top. That's just for my preference basically, just need to combine them. So I'm going to process that until it turns into a sort of fine sand or breadcrumb like texture. and that's good, like that. So I'm going to put in most of the water. I'll hold back maybe a tablespoon and a half. I'm going to process it until it clumps together into a dough. So I can see that's clumping together and it's not all combined yet, but I'm going to tip that out onto the work surface, and I've used most of the water now. I added a little drop more as I was processing it, but I've still got about a teaspoon of the water left, which I don't think I'm going to need. So I'm going to work this into a dough, and I'm actually going to knead it for 2 or 3 minutes, because I want it to not be like a short crust pastry, but to be firmer than that, basically, because it has to be quite sturdy to be the authentic type of pasty. Now, I forgot when I was making the dough to put the salt in, but as I've been kneading it, I realised that, and what I've done is I've just sprinkled a bit of salt on the dough and folded it over like that to knead that in. So it should go in at the beginning, but it will work just as well doing it that way. So that's my dough kneaded, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to simply flatten that into a disc like that, and I'm going to wrap that in plastic wrap, and I'm going to chill it for at least 2 hours. I want this to rest and be nice and cold, and then once it's chilled for 2, maybe 3 hours, I will come back and we'll go on to add the, roll it out, add the filling. And at that stage I'll have my oven preheating to 200 Celsius, 180 Celsius with a fan, 400 Fahrenheit, and I will have lined a couple of baking trays with parchment paper ready to take the pasties for baking. My pastry has been in the fridge chilling for about 2.5 hours now, and I've cut my vegetables up. So the first thing I'm going to do is to mix the filling together. So in here I have my 400 grams of potatoes, which I've chopped into small pieces like that, and about the same size pieces I've chopped the 200 grams of swede or rutabaga as well. So they're there, and here's my onion, and here's the beef, and I've cut the beef into small chunks as well, basically, roughly the same size. So I'm going to sprinkle my half a teaspoon of salt over the potatoes, and then a good grind of pepper, which I've already done as well. And then I'm going to put the onions in and the meat, and I'm going to just use my hand to mix those around. And get them all combined. Make sure the meat's fairly evenly distributed with the vegetables. Like that. And then I'm going to set that aside while I roll out the pastry. So I've taken the pastry out of the fridge, and I'm going to divide it into 6 pieces of about equal weight. So I've divided the dough, and I'm going to form each piece into a ball, and I'm going to press it down on a lightly floured surface just to flatten it a little bit, like that. And then I'm going to roll that out to a diameter of 22 centimetres, which is just about 9 inches. And I have the inside of my tart tin, which will allow me to measure that I've reached that. And those of you who've watched my videos will know that I'm not very good at rolling out, but that's almost the right size. So I'm just going to roll that just a little bit more there, like that. And then I'm going to simply trim that off. I'm using the back of a knife here so I don't cut my mat. And that's going to be the pasty. So then what I've got to do is to put about 1/6 of my mixture into the pasty in the centre basically, and then I'm going to take one side and fold it over onto the other side. And that's about 1/6 of the mixture. So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my beaten egg and I'm going to simply brush around the edge of the pastry on 1/2 like that, and I'm going to lift the pastry up and join it together basically. And if any of the mixture tries to escape, you can just tuck it back in. So that's filled it. So I'm going to turn it onto its side, and I'm actually going to press it down using the outside of my hand, like that, and then we have to crimp it. So I'm simply going to take the pastry and roll it up. You can form it into a rope, which is what the professionals might do, but I'm just going to roll it up like that, just for ease basically. And then when I've got it up like that, I'm simply going to make a little pattern in it with the edge of my knife. And I'm going to put that on the baking tray and do the remainder. So I've rolled out and filled the 6 pasties. I patched one with some pastry that cracked a little bit, but should be okay. So I'm going to take the egg that I've beaten and I'm going to brush it over each of them. And then, with them all brushed like that, I'm going to simply make a couple of slits in the top of each one. That's to let the steam out as they cook. I've often seen them made where they don't make the slit, so I don't know that it's absolutely necessary, but I prefer to do it. Just like that. And I'm going to put those into the oven and I'm going to bake them for 15 minutes at that first temperature, and then I'm going to reduce the oven temperature to 160 Celsius, 140 Celsius with a fan, 325 Fahrenheit, and I'm going to bake them for a further 40 minutes. And at that stage I'll take them out of the oven and allow them to cool down, and then I'll come back and show you what they look like. I baked my Cornish pasties for 15 minutes at the higher temperature, 200 Celsius, 180 Celsius with a fan, 400 Fahrenheit. Then I reduced the heat to 160 Celsius, 140 Celsius with a fan, 325 Fahrenheit, and I baked them actually for another 45 minutes. And I think 40 minutes would have been enough, but I left them in for an extra 5 minutes. I tested the internal temperature and that was good. So I took them out of the oven. I've put them onto a wire rack and I've allowed them, they're still warm. In fact, these are still quite hot because I did another half batch as well on top of the recipe that I've given to you. I did half again. And I've cut one open that's cooling down. So you can see that's nicely spread around inside and the pastry is cooked, and I'll have a taste of this. That is very, very good. You get the vegetables cooked perfectly, sweetness from the swede or the rutabaga, and then the lovely flavour of the meat and a hit of pepper. I've put the salt and the pepper in, but just a hit of pepper. And from memory, in my childhood I didn't like Cornish pasties because they were peppery, but now I quite enjoy them. So these are actually quite simple to make. It takes a while because you leave the dough to proof. The idea is to get the dough, the pastry dough, worked so that it's flexible and it's strengthened, because these are supposed to be held in the hand for eating, which is how they sell them in Cornwall basically. Normally put them in a paper bag and you hold the paper bag and you eat them. So very, very good and quite easy to make, as I said. So that's going to be it for this recipe, and I hope you've enjoyed it. If you have, please give me the thumbs up below and click to subscribe to my YouTube channel. In the top right hand corner of the screen I'll put an eye that you can click on, and that will take you to a link for the recipe, and I'll put a link below the video as well. And I'll be back with another recipe in the very near future. So until then, happy baking.